White Hives in Beeswarm Simulator are economic powerhouses. You feed them material, mainly gumdrops, and they produce an insane amount of honey in a short amount of time. These players define themselves by the size of their gummy stars with skills to match, and they have developed quite the reputation for being the most expensive hives to run. Similar to red and blue hives, many updates throughout the years have altered the playstyles of these players, forcing them to develop new techniques to adjust to the meta. Boosting as a white hive could be considered the most difficult to get into, yet the rewards massively outweigh the risks in this situation. Players that can master this trade find themselves climbing the leaderboards, solidifying their spot in Beeswarm history. This is the complete evolution of the White Hive. Personally, I'd consider White Hives one of the younger colors to be introduced, at least compared to its red and blue counterparts. White Hives wouldn't have been considered an actual meta until the Supreme Star amulet. However, there were still weird renditions of a White Hive that foreshadowed what was to come. For example, we're going to take a look at one of these early quote-unquote caveman White Hives. On December 6, 2019, after coming off of being an attack hive, the leaderboard player Mcproseph started a new trend by adding pure carpenter bees into his hive. At his peak, he had up to 15 carpenter bees. Now, the way that this hive worked is that the honey marks that spawned would give a player tons of conversion links. These links would passively empty out the bag, allowing a player to farm a field for a longer period of time. The stacked up pollen marks would also cover the field in marks, allowing a player's honey to be multiplied. The only issue is that both of these marks capped out at 3x when linked, so the validity of this strategy was questioned at the time. December 23rd, 2019. This marks the day when the 2019 Beesmas had released, and the introduction of mythic bees. Here we have 3 crucial bees that would begin to shift the meta, these being vectors, spices, and tadpoles. The vector bee was a new colorless bee that had the ability to stretch triangles and collect honey with anything captured within. Its ability also allowed it to draw over marks, increasing the pollen from those marks by 50%. If drawn over pollen marks, these could give up to 2 times more white pollen, and if drawn over honey or festive marks, it would gain 50% instant conversion. This bee marked the start of an expanding white hive meta, and it started to show on its plan for Beeswarm's endgame. Vectors would prove to be quite effective for most players, and they began to implement them into their mixed hives. Only about 5 to 7 vectors would be added into a hive at any given time. On April 6, 2020, the fuzzy bee released, yet another colorless bee. This bee was able to benefit all colors, but some pseudo-white hives at the time began to spam up to 5 of these in their hive. The idea for fuzzy alt would come much later. This same day also saw the gummy mask reworked. All masks had field capacity buffs, but it depended on the color of the field they were in. Gummy mask also gained a slight buff here in regards to the goo and the morph. June 6, 2020, a long-awaited day after a considerable amount of testing of a brand new feature. Before this day, Onnit had utilized the test realm and allowed players to choose between 3 different colors to play with. The system being tested was of course none other than the Supreme Star amulet. However, the key passive to note was the Gummy Star. This was seen by many board players at the time as the best passive to run, mainly due to its complement to standard mixed hive boosting at the time. Little did we know that this was the birth to an official White Hive meta. The Gummy Star was a passive on the Supreme Star amulet that had a probability to activate with gumdrops, something unique only to this passive. It would summon a Gummy Star, which provided instant conversion, goo conversion, and white pollen bonuses, as well as a large amount of extra goo. After popping, honey tokens would be dropped and scaled based on the amount of gifted colorless bees, and some gumdrop tokens would be refunded as well. This led to many top mixed hive players to begin dropping colored bees that would be deemed worthless, and instead emphasis would be placed more on colorless bees as well as having more vectors. The Gummy Star would also end up being paired up with the Star Saw, as the Star Saw granted both collection and instant conversion of the player's bag, becoming the perfect secondary passive to pair up with. The results would be astonishing. That same summer of 2020, after months of constant domination from Spicy Bee Red Hives, the final nerf of the Spicy Bee allowed a true White Hive meta to begin to take the stage. This starts with Gola on June 13th, who passes Mcproseph, who was a Red Hive macro player at the time. Immediately the following day, a player by the name of Mcproseph comes along and passes Gula. They go back and forth for another 2 days, 2 White Hives battling it out for the #1 spot until Mcproseph finally holds on to the spot on June 16th. Mosito is a player that has set a new standard for White Hives. Each boost that he does increases by large factors, one after the other, until on August 16, 2020, he does a massive 13 trillion honey in one day. This leads many to even claim that he's a hacker. However, Rod and Mcproseph, who are red hives boosting with meteors, were able to somewhat match this. Mosito's feat is even more impressive considering that he was competing with red hives who were using overpowered meteor boosting. This type of domination by Mosito as well as other white players continued into the Beesmas of 2020, where B-Quips would be introduced. Nothing too notable happened during this time. Red Hives were still generally overshadowing White Hives, with elol leading the way, who ended up passing Mosito that Beesmas. However, that year, a player by the name of JoshDaNoob was able to accomplish an insane feat through a boost that he had prepared for months. This boost relied on his own guiding star from Honest Lid Art to line up with the spider field, and these were the results. With the Guiding Star, Inspire, paired with the Slate and Periwinkle jelly beans, this boost became monstrous, stacking up to a 26 trillion gummy star at its peak, which could still somewhat hold up even compared to today. At the time he ran 13 vectors and only had a 2x spider field boost. Although Red was dominating during the Beesmas of 2020, this boost set a new standard, even surpassing elol's previous 70 trillion and 100 trillion boosts, and showed that with proper preparation, White still had the capability to compete and then some. On December 26, 2021, the introduction of two mythic bees had released, the Precise and the Buoyant. New mechanics like balloons and puff strings were introduced, and jelly beans were nerfed. With the introduction of the Precise and Buoyant bees, playstyles of all three colors began to drastically shift. 3 new endgame tools were also introduced, which were the Gummy Baller, Tide Popper, and Dark Scythe. The Gummy Baller was a tool that could absorb goo and in turn stack up the gummy ball. Fresh goo allowed the Gummy Baller to be more effective, so players would start using gumdrop helpers and more alts during their boosts. The Gummy Ball also gave higher combos if it bounced off precise marks, so these would be launched as straight as possible against areas with high amounts of active marks for a higher combo. This update shifted White in a way where skill would dominate and players would have to come up with their own boosting techniques. Along with more vectors, some more precise would also be added in order to obtain those precise marks and precision stacks. Around this time, a player by the name of Green Ninja 119 had discovered boosting with Gummy Shower, which most believed to be impossible at the time. However, he made it work and even helped Mikey during his switch to White during this update. Mikey was actually the one who told me about this, so huge thank you to him. On December 26, 2022, the release of the RoboBear Challenge and the Digital Bee yet again began to shift how White Hives would play. The addition of this bee allowed abilities to be duplicated, as well as field corruption, forcing players to take these into account during their boosts. Players like Mikey began to redefine how these hives would be played after learning from their mentors. Multiple world records were set one after the other, and it's quite insane considering how each feat before would be considered quite difficult to beat. The current world record is currently held by Pythor, with a whopping 2.7 quadrillion gummy star, making a total of 9 quadrillion during the entire boost. It was done with a self-guiding inspider similar to Josh's boost years prior. Although there's very little updates or any new features to continue to change the White Hive meta, there are players that are still working to achieve the impossible. On December 20th, 2023, Mikey and Ori on elol's account together are able to achieve 100 quadrillion honey. Mikey then passes elol for the top spot around February of 2024, and then another White Hive player, Sin, also makes his way into the top 3, even claiming the number 1 spot on February 12th. Although White Hives have been the youngest hive color, it's also seen the fiercest competition. There are many other great players I could have mentioned, but then we'd be here forever. Current White Hive players are required to be innovative and cunning, as the bar has been raised quite high. Perhaps the record set by Pythor may stand, or someone else may come along and claim that title. Only time will tell.